My agricultural background includes growing up on a small farm in Oklahoma. My father farmed full-time cotton, wheat, a little corn, and I grew up on that farm and we always had a big backyard garden, and so that's where my love of good food came from, because that was a big portion of our diet. And eventually my father found it to be a need to go get a full-time off-farm job because he had 5 children to support. So we moved to a smaller farm, and he wound up just doing the hobby farming with cattle. But we still always had that big backyard garden. And even though I was born between 2 brothers, so I didn't have to milk the cow or haul the hay, I did have a major role in helping my mother harvest and put by the food that we got from that garden. And I remember once when I was 15, she went to Hawaii for a month where her first grandchild was born. And so I was left in charge at that age of providing the meals and putting up the produce from the garden and all of that. I feel like I grew up barefoot on the farm, always exploring the farm. I was very lucky in that regard. We had a dog that would follow us and take care of us. My mother called it her babysitter, so we were able to wander the farm at will when we were growing up. Then when I went off to college, it was like, oh, the farm was in the rearview mirror. I had no ambition in that regard at all. I thought I was leaving farming behind, although I started majoring in biochemistry because I was interested in the sciences, and that was in the College of Agriculture as I think back on it. But I was not very inspired with dissecting the science and nature of things down to its component parts. It lost something for me in that process. It lost the spirit of the whole. So I didn't see a future in continuing working in research laboratories like I did for several years. And then we started having a family, and it took time to be home with my children, which was a very important value for me. I was able, thankfully, to do that. And an opportunity came to have a religious education director job at our church, which is Unitarian Church here in Des Moines. And that gave me opportunities in exploring spirituality that I'm grateful for. But I also didn't see my futures being there. I still wanted to do something with plants. And of course, my idea was to have an organic farm, fruit farm. And while I was attending school, I went to a workshop, an organic workshop, I think it was the Upper Midwest, where I learned about the CSA concept, community-supported agriculture. And I really gravitated to that concept because of the value system it had of cooperative relationship with your customers and the great diversity of crops you could grow. You wouldn't be concentrating on just 1 or 2. And it just seemed like a healthy value system to have with the farm. So that's how I got back into agriculture. All of a sudden I turned the car around and I'm driving toward the farm again. My first year I thought I was going to have 15 customers, and I offered full shares and half shares because some of the CSAs had done that. Well, everybody wanted to have shares, so I wound up with 30 customers, and I thought, okay, well, I'm not going to offer that full share, we'll just do half shares. So I started out with 30 customers, and it has evolved to 150 now, and we're thinking about adding a few more, but we're a little bit limited by our perennial crops. Those are harder to increase faster than the customer base, and I have lots of demand that we are having trouble meeting. So my husband and I have been looking for appropriate land for probably 4 or 5 years, and I finally gave up on finding an established farm that met all my conditions, and I found a piece of bare ground that was part of a conventional farm, and I decided to buy 20 acres off of that. There was nothing there. There was not even a road to get into it. I had to come in on the other part of the acreage and walk over there. So when we purchased it, while I was still in the rental ground, me and my helpers walked with strawberry plants in hand and went over and made space and planted strawberries to have for the following year when I would be on that space. So it was not easy. And so we put in the driveway eventually. I drilled a very deep well, so we'd have that. And I bought a walk-in cooler and a hoop house, and I just had a little canopy to work under when I first started. So it has certainly evolved from bare ground, conventional land. So I had to tell my customers, I'm not going to be organic for 3 years. And because you have that direct relationship with your customers and you can explain things to them and educate them, then they understood. And I think I only lost maybe one person in that transition. So it went from being bare ground to being what it is today, which is probably only a few acres in production at that time, to now 6 or 7 acres in production. Have a little barn now, so we're protected better from the weather than we were under a little pop-up canopy. I wanted to be a convenient location in case I did the U-pick so that the public could access it, or so my CSA customers could easily access it. So the property is right on Highway 17 at Granger. So highway fronts it on the west side, and it starts out as fairly level, but then it has slopes upward to the east, and so it has a nice slope to it, which is important for air drainage on crops. The lower ground is a little bit more fertile than the high ground. I don't use the top 5 acres of the 20 acres very much. And on the steeper slope of the hill, I put in the perennial crops of strawberries and raspberries to try and keep the soil from eroding, conservation in mind for that. That's where the asparagus is too. And so you have the crops, the perennial crops that come back every year, and the annual crops, and I have enough property that I can rotate between the lower part and the higher part so that there's good rotation going on with the annual crops. There's a few woods on the north side, which is important because we do have bird populations there, which can be important for insects control. I was there one of the first evenings when the farm was new, and could hear coyotes howling in the early evening, and I thought, oh, this is good. This is rabbit control, and that's been good. And so I'm worried about now, as the rest of the property that I didn't buy, the 20 off the 90 acres that I didn't buy, has been developed and annexed into the town of Granger. And so I'm worried not only about things like losing the coyotes coming in to control the rabbits, but there's also the concern about encroachment of urbanization on the farm. And it was amazing the first year. I had one helper and we were working that land the first year, and all the thousands of strawberry plants we planted, the hundreds of potatoes we dug, we planted asparagus, digging the trenches, and that entire first summer we saw less than 5 earthworms with all that digging in the dirt. And now if you were to go to the farm and every shovelful you dig, you would find 5 earthworms. And I don't know, just the thought of there only have been corn and soybeans there, and then I'm growing over 30 different vegetable crops and fruits on there now. So it looks a lot different than it did. It's little ecosystems around the farm instead of one big system. I'm in the process of trying to bring someone else in to kind of take over the farm. I'm training Ben Saunders right now. He's interested in running a CSA, and so my goal this year is to cut back to a 40-hour work week, which would be great. And then if that works out, we'll talk about maybe cutting back even further. But that's a transition the farm's looking at right now.